They expect you to break. They expect you to take the bait, lash out, explain yourself, prove something. This world is engineered to provoke you. Notifications flooding in, people testing your limits, chaos pressing against you from every direction. It is all designed to shake you, to make you move without thinking, to speak without clarity, to feel without control. But what if you refused? What if, in the middle of all that noise, you could simply remain still? Not because you are indifferent, but because you have trained your mind to respond rather than react. Because you have rooted yourself in something far deeper than impulse. That is what Stoicism teaches us. Your power is not in how you behave when life is comfortable. It is in how you hold your center when everything around you is begging you to fall apart. And in a world that profits from your emotional destruction, your calm becomes an act of rebellion. Your self-discipline becomes your strategy. Your stillness becomes your greatest strength. So if you have ever felt like your peace is too easily stolen or your emotions too easily hijacked, this is your moment to take that power back. Not by fighting harder, but by standing firmer. By mastering what the Stoics call the only true domain of power, your inner world. If you are ready to build that kind of strength, not just for appearance, but for your soul, then follow along. Let us walk this path together. There is a particular silence that unsettles people far more than any outburst ever could. You have probably felt it. The kind of silence that makes others grow uncomfortable, that makes them talk more than they should, that makes them try harder to get beneath your skin. It is not emptiness, it is mastery. The reason certain people fear your stillness is simple. They cannot manipulate it. They cannot read your thoughts, predict your response, or even determine if you will respond at all. That uncertainty exposes their own desperation, their need to feel dominant, to drag you into their game where they hold the rules. But here is the truth that most people miss. When someone provokes you, they are not seeking connection. They are seeking compliance. They want your energy, your time, your reaction. The moment you surrender it, you hand them the entire script. You become a character in their story rather than the author of your own. There is a quiet dignity in pausing, not just in biting your tongue, but in truly seeing the situation for what it is. Someone attempting to pull you out of your peace. You do not need to swing back. You do not need to demonstrate your intelligence, your wit, or your strength. All you need to do is refuse to play. Because every time you react from impulse, from that raw instinct to defend yourself, you are stepping into someone else's frame. You are reacting on their schedule. You are proving that you can be triggered, summoned, poked into motion like a machine. And the cost of that is your energy, your dignity, and your clarity. Calm is not the absence of emotion, it is the presence of mastery. It means you feel everything clearly, but you have trained yourself to decide whether it deserves expression and when. It is like moving through fire without letting the flames consume you. You feel the heat, you acknowledge it, but you do not flail, you hold the line. And in that stillness, people encounter something they cannot control. That is when they either begin to respect you or they reveal exactly who they are. Either outcome is a victory. Think about how often people lay little traps for you. Sarcasm threaded into casual conversation, jokes that carry hidden venom, compliments that somehow leave a sting. These are not accidents, they are tests. Will you flinch? Will you retaliate? Will you scramble to defend yourself? Most people fall for it every time. They want to correct the record. They want justice. They want the other person to admit what they did. That rarely happens, so instead of resolution, they get frustration. Stoicism offers a more powerful alternative. You are responsible for your response, not their action. That space between what they do and how you react, that is your entire domain. Either you guard it or you surrender it. When you stop reacting, something profound shifts inside you. You stop being a puppet and you start becoming a presence that does not rise to bait, a presence that does not need to mirror energy, a presence that feels genuinely untouchable. But this takes practice, it takes failure, it takes moments where you react and immediately regret it, where you say too much, where old patterns pull you back. That is part of the journey. Every time you get pulled from your peace, it is simply another opportunity to rebuild it stronger, to notice the trigger sooner, to pause a little longer, and gradually your reactions become responses. Your silence stops feeling like swallowed pain and begins to feel like owned power. There is something about silence that makes people deeply uneasy, not the silence of solitude or rest, but the kind that settles between two people when one of them chooses not to speak. That kind of silence feels loud, uncomfortable, almost confrontational, and that is exactly where its power lives. We exist in a culture that tells us to fill every gap, respond to everything instantly, justify ourselves before anyone even asks. But what if the most powerful move available to you is not to speak louder, but to say nothing at all? Silence destabilizes those who need chaos to maintain control. Some people depend on the constant back and forth, the noise, the drama, the endless exchange, to feel like they are winning. As long as you are talking, defending, justifying, they can track your emotions and anticipate your next move. But when you go quiet, you become unreadable. Your composure, not your absence of noise, is what disturbs them. They begin to wonder what you are thinking, what you are planning, what you might say, or more powerfully, what you will never say. Silence is not weakness. It is not retreat. It is not avoidance. It is the disciplined choice to exit the storm rather than become part of it. You do not need to argue to establish that you are right. You do not need to force your way into being heard. And you absolutely do not need to justify every decision to people who have already made up their minds. Some moments require no explanation. Some people deserve no answer. Let your actions carry the message. Let your absence speak. Let your stillness communicate what words never could. When you remain quiet long enough, something fascinating begins to unfold. People rush to fill the void. They speak more than they intended. They repeat themselves. They disclose things they never meant to reveal. Their mask begins to slip. Their fears and insecurities spill out without any effort on your part. Not because you pushed them, but because your silence made them uncomfortable enough to expose themselves. And you simply listen. You observe. You collect truth without lifting a finger. Because the one who listens always sees more than the one who speaks. We all enjoy being recognized. A kind word here, acknowledgement there. It genuinely feels good to be seen and appreciated. But there is a boundary most people never notice until they have crossed it. The line between accepting praise gracefully and needing it in order to feel whole. Once that line is crossed, compliments stop being a gift and become a dependency. At first it is subtle. A compliment lifts you and you shrug it off. Then it happens again and again, and slowly you begin to notice that the smile on your face does not feel quite as genuine unless someone has offered you positive feedback. You start needing it. And that is precisely when the trap closes. Your sense of worth becomes attached to something entirely outside yourself. You are no longer standing on solid ground. You are floating, waiting for the next bit of praise to keep you in the air. Stoicism offers us something far more durable. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. That means your worth is not determined by what others say about you or whether you are noticed at all. It depends on the standard you hold for yourself internally. The world may praise or criticize you, but neither should define you. Praise and flattery are pleasant, like sunlight, enjoyable when they come, but not something you can survive on. If you base your inner state on external approval, you will always be at the mercy of conditions you cannot control. When you become attached to praise, you begin performing for approval. Your decisions start to orbit what others think, rather than what you actually value. You are no longer acting because something is right. You are acting because you want to hear those words again. And the moment that shift happens, you have surrendered your power. You have traded authentic living for applause. The path forward is not to reject all compliments. It is to build a foundation so solid that no compliment, however glowing, can shake your sense of who you are. You receive it, you appreciate it, and you release it. You do not need it to continue. Your worth does not live in their words. It lives in your alignment with your own values. There is something peculiar that happens when chaos takes over. It does not just make things louder or messier. It makes everything accelerate. People begin speaking faster, responding faster, demanding decisions as though the clock is seconds from zero. It feels as if the world itself begins spinning at a higher speed, dragging everyone along with it. But here is what most people miss. None of that urgency is real productivity. It is panic wearing the costume of momentum. It is the noise of people scrambling, convincing themselves they are moving forward when they are really just rushing toward mistakes. The true skill, the real source of power, lies in choosing to slow down. Not to stop entirely, but to take ownership of your pace while the world tries to sweep you into its frenzy. In Stoic philosophy, slowing down is not about reducing physical speed. It is about cultivating inner stillness. When everything around you accelerates, you become the one who stays rooted. Instead of reacting to the chaos, you move with deliberate and thoughtful steps. You stop being pulled by the current and start navigating with intention. Think about how often you have made rushed decisions because everything felt urgent. How many times have you agreed to something, fired off a message, or made a choice simply because you felt there was no time to think? That is not urgency. That is anxiety disguised as productivity. The antidote is the calm mind. The mind that does not surrender to pressure, but instead chooses to move with purpose, taking one deliberate step at a time, making certain each move is the right one. There is also something remarkable about seeing what others miss when you slow down. When everyone else is frantically pushing forward, you begin to notice details that vanish in the rush. You catch what goes unspoken. You feel what others overlook. You see the consequences of decisions before they unfold. And because of that, you make fewer errors. In a world that perpetually demands more of your time, slowing down becomes an act of quiet resistance, not laziness, strategy, not hesitation, discipline. The more you learn to decelerate in the face of urgency, the more mastery you develop over your circumstances. You become the calm observer within the storm, present, aware, and entirely in command. It is remarkable how effortlessly we believe someone when their words align with what we want to hear. We are drawn in by kindness, moved by promises, sometimes even soothed by apologies. But words, as beautifully crafted as they can be, are inexpensive. They can be rehearsed, polished, and delivered in precisely the right tone to conceal what is truly happening beneath the surface. What genuinely reveals a person is not what they say. It is what they do when no one is watching, or when circumstances stop going their way. That is where truth lives. Not in comfortable moments, but in moments of pressure, silence, and inconvenience. That is when patterns begin to emerge. And once you start truly seeing those patterns, you cannot unsee them. You begin to notice the gap between what people claim to value and what their consistent behavior actually demonstrates. The friend who says they support you, but always redirects every conversation back to themselves. The colleague who champions teamwork, but disappears when there is real work to share. The person who claims to value honesty, but only welcomes it when it does not challenge them. None of this is coincidence. It is a pattern, and patterns do not lie. Stoicism urges us to separate appearances from reality, not just in the world around us, but in the people within it. It encourages us to develop a settled mind that is not swayed by charm or captured by smooth words. Reality does not live in what is said, it lives in what is repeated. When you detach from emotional noise and begin collecting evidence, not to build a case but simply to see clearly, you start operating from wisdom rather than wishful thinking. You stop arguing with people who are trying to convince you of who they are. You simply watch. You adjust your expectations to match what is real. That is emotional maturity. That is the Stoic discipline applied to relationships. Life is unpredictable. It throws things at us that we never anticipated. One moment, everything is settled, and the next, you are blindsided by something you never saw coming. Most people panic in those moments. They are so caught off guard by the impact that they lose themselves in it. They become hostages to their own reaction. But there is a different way to move through the world, one where you mentally prepare for the worst, not because you want it to happen, but because you refuse to let it destroy you when it does. The Stoic philosophers were masters of this practice. They understood that life was not about avoiding pain, it was about how you meet it when it arrives. Sitting with the possibility of loss, of failure, of betrayal, and accepting it without being shattered by it, not because you wanted those things, but because you knew you could survive them if they came. When you mentally prepare for what could go wrong, you stop being a victim of it when it happens. You cannot predict every detail of your life, but you can choose how you respond to whatever arrives. The calmest people are those who have already rehearsed the difficult chapters in their minds. They know that suffering and setbacks are inevitable features of human experience. They are not afraid of them. In fact, they have come to accept them as part of the cycle. And because they have accepted this, they remain steady when challenges arise. By confronting the worst-case scenarios in your mind and accepting their possibility, you develop the mental resilience to face whatever life presents. This is not about living in constant anticipation of disaster. It is about preparing your mind so that it is not broken when difficulty arrives. When you stop running from the possibility of pain, you stop being paralyzed by the fear of it. Instead, you are ready to face it with clarity, steadiness, and resolve. Life will not unfold perfectly. People will fall short. Plans will collapse. But if you have accepted that reality from the start, you do not panic when it materializes. You face it with the quiet confidence of someone who already knew they could handle whatever came next. There is something almost intoxicating about declaring your ambitions to the world. The excitement that surges when you share your plans. The pride in speaking your goals into existence. But here is what most people never realize. When you broadcast your aspirations, you often distract yourself from the actual work. The more you announce, the less you build. The more you talk about what you intend to create, the more space you create for outside noise, pressure, and expectation to crowd in. You begin measuring your progress by other people's reactions instead of your own growth. Stoicism teaches us that our actions should be driven by inner conviction, not external reward. We act because it is right and aligned with our values, not because we want others to applaud the effort. When you live this way, your work becomes grounded. There is no performance required. You are who you are, regardless of whether anyone is watching. Praise becomes something you can receive without clinging to it. It arrives, you acknowledge it, and you continue. Think about what happens when you become too vocal about your goals. People start tracking your progress. They invest themselves in your outcome, offering unsolicited opinions, or worse, quietly waiting to see you fall. You start working toward their expectations instead of your own truth. But when you keep your hunger private, when you work quietly and consistently without broadcasting every step, something shifts. Your progress becomes entirely yours. And in time, when the results can no longer be ignored, the world will see your effort. But by then, you will not need their acknowledgement, because you have already found your fulfillment in the doing itself. True ambition, the Stoic kind, is not loud. It does not require an audience. It is steady, disciplined, and moves forward without fanfare or validation. Keep your hunger to yourself. Let it grow in silence. And when the fruit of your labor finally shows, let that speak for everything. There is a primal drive within all of us to defend ourselves when we feel wronged. Someone dismisses your effort, disrespects you in conversation, or pushes past a clear boundary, and the immediate instinct is to fight back. You want them to understand what they did. You want justice, and you want it now. The problem is that pursuing resolution in the heat of the moment almost never leads to actual resolution. It feeds the cycle. It turns into an emotional tug-of-war where neither side truly wins. The Stoics understood this clearly. They did not sprint to defend their reputation against every insult thrown their way. Stoicism is not about being passive or allowing people to mistreat you. It is about being patient, calculated, and wise enough to know that real justice rarely arrives immediately. It is built over time. And often, the most powerful response to disrespect is to pause, reflect, and allow your consistent behavior to answer, rather than your words in a heated moment. When someone disrespects you, the instinct is to react. Society tells us to fight back, to stand our ground, to never let anyone get away with it. But instant reaction does not bring peace, it brings escalation. The more you rush to correct the wrong in the moment, the more emotionally invested in the conflict you become, and the less clearly you see. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. To breathe, to step back, to allow the situation to settle before you decide how to respond. This is not avoidance, it is strategy. It is the quiet authority of someone who does not need to prove their worth through every confrontation. Your calm in those moments becomes the response they least expected. They anticipated retaliation, they prepared for emotion. When they receive stillness instead, they do not know what to do with it. And in that confusion, you hold all the power. True justice is not about winning the argument in the moment. It is about maintaining your integrity over time, about being the kind of person whose consistent character speaks louder than any single exchange. That is a victory no one can reverse. Your emotional energy is a limited resource. Most people spend it without ever tracking the balance. Every time you react impulsively, every time you allow someone to disrupt your internal state, you are making a withdrawal. Not in money, but in something far more valuable: your focus, your peace, your clarity. You wake up each day with a certain reserve, and how you allocate it shapes everything. Who you give your attention to, what you allow to drain you, what you choose to let pass. What you decide is genuinely worth your effort. But if you never become conscious of your emotional spending, you will consistently end the day exhausted, hollow, and wondering where all your peace disappeared. It begins with small things. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and the irritation follows you for hours. A passive remark at work replays in your mind all afternoon. You rehearse an old argument 10 different ways, composing the perfect response to something that already passed. None of these are emergencies. None of them are worth what they cost, yet you keep paying, and the other person has already forgotten the entire exchange. That is the real trap. You hand your emotional reserves to people who never earned access to them. Stoicism offers a different framework entirely. The Stoics believed that your inner peace should never be available for the taking, that what you feel and how you respond exists entirely within your own authority, regardless of what others do. Think of your emotional energy like a bank account. Arguing with someone who has no interest in resolution is a withdrawal. Obsessing over outcomes you cannot influence is a check you cannot cash. And just like financial debt, emotional bankruptcy leaves you with nothing available for the people and purposes that genuinely deserve it. Your calm, your patience, your focused attention go to things that have earned them, not to every small provocation that crosses your path. The more deliberately you choose where to invest your emotional presence, the more of it you have. And that steadiness, that consistent fullness, is not something you can fake. It is earned through the repeated choice to protect what matters and release what does not. That is your emotional wealth, and it is worth everything. Not every compliment is born from genuine care. Some of the most carefully constructed words carry hidden intentions. We all enjoy being told that we are doing well, that we are admired, that our work is seen. It feels warm. It opens us. But that openness is precisely why flattery is such an effective tool of manipulation. The most dangerous influence often begins with kindness. It disarms you. It softens your discernment. It shifts your attention away from what is actually unfolding. And it does not always arrive with malicious intent, which makes it even harder to detect. Because when we are made comfortable, we stop asking questions. We stop noticing. The Stoics teach us to hold both criticism and praise at a careful distance, because both have the capacity to disturb your internal equilibrium if you let them. The wise mind does not become intoxicated by flattery or crushed by insult. It stays level. It remains anchored. A compliment is accepted with gratitude, but not clung to. It is received and released. It does not become the foundation of your identity. Because the moment you need praise to feel secure in yourself, you have created a vulnerability that those who understand people can and will exploit. Flattery is sometimes sincere, but at other times it is entirely strategic. People tell you exactly what you want to hear, not to build you up, but to gain access, to lower your defenses, to create a sense of trust that would otherwise take far longer to establish. The compliment becomes a transaction. And if your discernment is not sharp, you will find yourself giving time, energy, and openness to people who were never genuinely invested in your well-being. The antidote is not suspicion or coldness, it is awareness. The calm mind hears the compliment and quietly asks, "Why this? Why now?" It does not react immediately. It observes. It reads the tone beneath the words, the timing, the context that surrounds the gesture, and it waits to see what follows. Because the true nature of praise, whether it is genuine or strategic, always reveals itself in what comes after. Stay sharp, even when things feel sweet. Some things are better left without words, not because you lack the language, but because the words no longer serve any purpose. There comes a moment in certain situations when explanation becomes exhausting, when repeating yourself stops making any difference, when the most honest response available to you is simply to leave without a sound. That is not weakness. That is a form of respect for yourself that no argument could ever demonstrate. People often believe that every ending requires a final conversation, that we owe others a carefully worded explanation, a summary of our grievances, a proper farewell. But real endings do not always come with neat conclusions. Sometimes they arrive as quiet departures, without a scene, without a production. And that silence, that clean exit, often communicates more than any word ever could. Stoicism asks us to focus on what lies within our control and release what does not. You cannot dictate whether someone understands your silence. You cannot force them to comprehend what your absence means. But you can decide when you are finished. You can choose not to justify yourself for the 100th time to someone who has never genuinely listened. You can determine that your peace is worth more than their reaction, and you can walk away. Not to punish, not to win, but to protect what remains of your spirit. There is a particular freedom that comes with a departure that requires no explanation. You release yourself from expectations, from cycles, from the weight of trying to make someone understand something they have already decided not to see. You reclaim your time. You reclaim your clarity, not through noise, but through a single quiet decision that says, I choose myself. People fear silence more than confrontation. When you argue, they have something to respond to. When you explain, they have a platform to debate. But when you simply disappear, they are left with the space you once filled. And in that space, they often see more clearly than they ever could during the noise. Not because you convinced them of anything, but because your absence held a truth your presence never could. That is your power. Not in what you say on the way out, but in the fact that you left at all. Life has a way of presenting chaos as something you are obligated to resolve. Someone is upset, something has broken, a situation is spiraling, and the instinct is to step in, to take charge, to fix what is falling apart. But what if the real strength lies in stepping back? What if the greatest act of self-possession is choosing to let things unfold without forcing your hand into the middle of them? That is not indifference. That is discernment. Stoicism teaches us that we cannot control everything, and the more aggressively we attempt to manage the world around us, the more we erode our own peace. You have power over your mind, and not over outside events. This is not resignation, it is clarity. There are things in life that exist entirely beyond your reach. You cannot prevent people from making their own mistakes. You cannot repair every mess that someone else created, and sometimes stepping in to do so only deepens the disorder. The Stoic path is not about rescuing every struggling situation. It is about recognizing which moments genuinely call for your involvement, and which ones will naturally resolve themselves if you simply allow them to. People who generate chaos consistently often expect others to come running. They want someone to absorb their consequences, to calm their storms, to carry the weight they themselves created. But when you are perpetually managing other people's crises, you deplete the reserves you need for your own life. At some point, you have to recognize that not every problem is yours. Not every collapsing structure requires your hands to hold it up. And in many cases, allowing something to fall completely is the most compassionate and honest response available. When structures built on dysfunction collapse, they create space for something more honest to grow. That is not cruelty, that is wisdom. The calm mind does not feel compelled to engage with every emergency. It observes, it assesses, it distinguishes between what is genuinely its responsibility and what is simply noise demanding attention. And in that distinction lies the preservation of your energy, your focus, and your deepest peace. There is a widespread misunderstanding about what calm actually looks like. People see someone quiet and composed in the middle of disorder and immediately assume that person is unfeeling, that the stillness on the outside means emptiness on the inside. But the truth is far more demanding and far more extraordinary. Real calm is not the absence of emotion, it is the presence of mastery over emotion. It does not mean you do not feel. It means you feel with full depth and then make a deliberate choice about how to move. You hold the emotion, you sit with it, you examine it, and then you decide what shape to give it and what purpose it will serve. Think of a sculptor working with raw stone. The stone represents emotion, heavy, unformed, powerful, and calm is the tool in the craftsman's hands. Without control, that stone just sits there, weighing everything down. But with steady, intentional work, it becomes something meaningful. You do not strike wildly, you do not rush. You carve with precision and purpose. That is what emotional mastery looks like, not suppression or avoidance, but genuine sovereignty. Knowing exactly what you feel and deciding consciously how to act in response to it. There is a widespread belief that reacting visibly is proof that you care deeply, that shouting demonstrates passion, that breaking down demonstrates sincerity. But reaction is not evidence of depth. It is often simply evidence of insufficient discipline. Reacting requires nothing but impulse. What requires genuine strength is the pause, the space you create between the emotion and the action. That breath, that moment of internal stillness where you ask yourself who you actually want to be in this moment. That is where your real power lives. The Stoics never asked us not to feel. What they asked us to do was develop a mind strong enough to receive emotion without being consumed by it. A mind that lets the heat of a difficult moment warm it without burning everything down. You do not flee from pain or difficulty, you move through it with composure. You let it inform you without letting it direct you. And over time, that practice of holding steady, even when everything around you is shifting, that becomes who you are. Not a performance of calm, but a genuine embodiment of it. A presence so rooted that the world around you feels the steadiness simply by being near it. That is not numbness. That is the highest expression of mastery.